Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just psychology, it's human truth. Every one of us is wired to love, to connect, to bond. Even the ones who run from connection, especially them. And the moment an avoidant decides to reach out after no contact is not random. It's the moment their soul wakes up to what their fear has been burying. There comes a point where the noise in their mind quiets, and their heart finally gets a chance to speak. When the emotions that once overwhelmed them settle into clarity, and suddenly they feel the space they created, and the echo inside that space calls your name. But understand this, they don't reach out because you chased. They don't reach out because you begged. They reach out because you stopped. Because your energy shifted from pursuit to presence, from fear to self-worth. And that contrast forces them to confront themselves in a way they've avoided their entire lives. There is a divine pattern in this. When you reclaim your power, you unintentionally invite others to rise to theirs. When you step back, they step forward, not because of manipulation, but because truth finally has room to breathe. You see, there's a moment every avoidant faces where the fear of losing you becomes louder than the fear of getting close. And that's the crack where light enters. That's the instant their mind stops defending and starts remembering. The laughter, the warmth, the safety they never admitted they felt, the version of themselves they liked better when they were with you. And in that moment, they reach out. But here's the real breakthrough. Whether they return or not, your power was never in their hands. The lesson isn't about waiting for their message. It's about realizing who you became while they were silent. The strength you built, the clarity you gained, the love you learned to give yourself. That's what draws people back. That's what transforms relationships. That's what changes lives. So if someone avoids you, let them. If they disappear, bless them. And if they return, meet them not with fear, not with desperation, but with the strength of a soul that finally knows its worth. Because the truth is this, people don't come back to the old you. They come back when you've become someone they can finally feel safe loving, stand tall, trust the process, honor your path. Your energy speaks long before your words do, and the world responds to the power you choose to embody. The shift from overwhelm to emotional equilibrium is one of the most critical turning points in the avoidant psyche, and understanding it can change the way you interpret their silence. Avoidants don't withdraw because they don't care. They withdraw because emotional intensity triggers an internal alarm system they've been conditioned to obey. When a relationship reaches a point that activates fears of dependency, vulnerability, or losing themselves, an avoidant's nervous system goes into overdrive. Their mind floods with thoughts like, I'm losing control, this is too much, or I need space before I suffocate. It's not logic guiding them in these moments. It's survival mode. During this state, even the simplest interactions can feel like pressure. A message might feel like a demand. A question might feel like a trap. A loving gesture might feel like a responsibility they're unprepared to carry. Their emotional world becomes a maze where every path seems to lead to overwhelm. So they retreat, physically, emotionally, or both. Not because they want distance from you, but because they desperately need distance from the internal chaos they can't articulate. This is where most people misunderstand them. The silence isn't intentional punishment. It's not about making you chase or proving a point. It's a coping mechanism, a way for them to recalibrate, to breathe, to shut down the emotional intensity that feels unmanageable. For someone with avoidant tendencies, space is not abandonment the way it may feel to others. It's relief. It's restoration. It's their emotional reset button. But here's the important part. This state does not last forever. The human nervous system naturally gravitates toward balance. When an avoidant pulls away, the initial feeling is relief, but over time, the relief softens into neutrality, and neutrality eventually dissolves into clarity. The emotions that once felt overwhelming begin to settle like stirred water returning to stillness. This is the beginning of their emotional equilibrium. When the internal pressure lifts, they can finally think about the relationship without the filter of fear. They start remembering the connection rather than the conflict. They recall your presence, not the pressure. They reflect on moments of peace, joy, and harmony, the ones their anxiety had temporarily blocked out. With space, they regain the ability to feel, but this time, without being consumed by it. In this state of equilibrium, they can evaluate the relationship more rationally. They might notice they miss your voice, your energy, your support. They may begin to feel curiosity instead of defensiveness. They revisit conversations and see them differently. What once felt like a threat may now feel like an opportunity for connection or growth. Emotional distance allows them to access parts of themselves they cannot reach when they feel cornered or overwhelmed, and this equilibrium isn't just emotional, it's psychological. Avoidants often carry hidden fears of inadequacy or not being enough. When these insecurities calm down, their confidence returns. They can initiate contact from a place of stability rather than panic. They can imagine reconnecting without feeling like they'll lose themselves in the process. This moment, this shift, is often the exact instant they consider reaching out. When their emotional world softens, when the mental fog lifts, when their heart can finally speak louder than their fear, they become open to connection again. The pull to reconnect doesn't come from pressure. It rises naturally when their internal world finally becomes safe enough for closeness. And it's in this space of balance, not chaos, where an avoidant finally sees the value of reaching out. Avoidants are often misunderstood as people who simply don't desire closeness, but the truth is far more complex and deeply human. The awakening of longing after distance is one of the most powerful forces that pulls an avoidant back toward connection. While their initial pullback is driven by fear, overwhelm, or the need to restore their autonomy, something entirely different happens once the emotional dust settles. The heart begins to speak in a language they can no longer ignore. This longing doesn't surface quickly. It emerges slowly, quietly, in moments when they least expect it. In the beginning, distance is exactly what they believe they need. Space feels like freedom, like the first deep breath after feeling smothered. But as the days pass and their nervous system stabilizes, the absence they created stops feeling like relief and begins to feel like emptiness. The silence that once protected them starts echoing with memories, small things at first, subtle reminders of connection that bypass their defenses and reach the vulnerable parts they often hide. It might be a laugh they suddenly remember, a familiar phrase you used to say, the comfort of your presence, or even a mundane routine you once shared. These memories arrive without warning, invited by nothing and triggered by everything. A song, a movie scene, the way someone else phrases a sentence. The longing doesn't start with dramatic realizations, it starts with soft whispers. And these whispers are powerful because they're not tied to conflict or pressure, they're tied to genuine emotional fulfillment. Avoidants often suppress their attachment needs, convincing themselves that independence is all they need. But humans are biologically wired for connection, and no attachment style can override that truth forever. Once they've had enough space to feel regulated, their suppressed needs begin to rise to the surface. What they pushed aside in the name of self-protection starts transforming into a quiet ache, an emotional pull toward what once felt safe, comforting, and meaningful. This longing is confusing for them. They don't experience it as I miss this person and want to get close. Instead, it appears as a subtle emotional nudge, an urge to check your social media, a curiosity about how you're doing, a sudden thought of reaching out that they try to brush off. But the more they try to ignore it, the stronger it becomes. Longing has a way of sneaking past the walls that fear builds. Eventually, they begin to feel the contrast, life with you versus life without you. They recall the emotional nourishment they receive from the connection, something they often take for granted while they're in it but deeply feel in its absence. Avoidants rarely appreciate emotional intimacy in the moment. They appreciate it in the aftermath, when they can observe it without feeling overwhelmed. And it's this clarity that awakens the longing. It's not just missing you, it's missing the version of themselves they felt safe being when they were with you. As the longing grows, internal conflict begins. They feel pulled toward you, yet scared of what that closeness might demand. However, longing has its own intelligence. Over time, it becomes stronger than the fear that caused them to withdraw. They start recognizing that the emptiness they feel isn't about wanting more space. It's about missing the bond, the warmth, the connection they had worked so hard to distance themselves from. This awakening of longing is often the emotional tipping point. It's the internal shift that softens their defenses and turns avoidance into curiosity. Once longing takes root, it becomes the bridge between silence and reconnection. It becomes the spark that makes them consider reaching out, not from panic or pressure, but from the genuine, undeniable desire to feel connected again. The moment when the fear of loss becomes stronger than the fear of closeness is one of the most pivotal psychological turning points in an avoidance emotional process. Avoidants spend a significant portion of their relational life trying to maintain a delicate balance. They crave connection like everyone else, but they fear what closeness might demand of them. They fear being needed too much, losing their independence, or failing to live up to someone's emotional expectations. This fear of engulfment becomes their guiding survival instinct, shaping their reactions, their communication, and their decisions. But underneath all that avoidance is a very real attachment system, one that can only stay dormant for so long before it begins to react. At first, their fear of closeness is the loudest voice in their internal world. It tells them to pull away. It convinces them that distance equals safety. It reassures them that silence will keep conflict at bay, and so they retreat, believing that losing someone is far less frightening than feeling vulnerable with them. Yet this belief is temporary. And when the emotional fog clears, avoidants are often met with a very different truth. The absence they created no longer feels like safety. It starts to feel like potential loss. The longer the silence continues, the more they begin to notice subtle signs that you're moving on or shifting your energy away from them. Maybe you're not posting as much. Maybe you look happier. Maybe you seem different. Or maybe they sense intuitively that you're not holding on to them the way you used to. This is the moment their attachment system wakes up. The avoidant who once took comfort in distance now begins to question it. Their internal narrative shifts from, "I need space," to, "What if the space becomes permanent?" The thought that you might actually detach, emotionally, energetically, or physically, triggers a new kind of fear, one that feels deeper and more jarring than the fear of intimacy ever did. Losing someone they care about hits their nervous system in a way they can't ignore. Avoidants often believe subconsciously that the connection will remain available to them no matter how distant they become. They assume you'll wait, stay, or keep the emotional door open. But the moment they sense that door quietly closing, everything changes. This shift doesn't happen dramatically. It happens in subtle, powerful realizations. They notice they haven't heard from you. They notice they no longer feel your pull. They notice that your energy, something they relied on more than they admitted, feels absent. And that's when their fear of loss becomes visceral. This fear awakens emotions they suppressed, memories they buried, and truths they avoided facing. Suddenly, the connection that felt overwhelming now feels precious. The closeness they once feared becomes something they crave, and the idea of reaching out becomes less intimidating than the possibility of losing access to your presence, your warmth, your support, or the version of themselves they felt when they were with you. It's important to understand that this shift is not manipulation. It's not about wanting control. It's the natural human instinct to protect something meaningful when the risk of losing it becomes real. When fear of closeness collides with fear of loss, the latter often wins because it taps into something primal, the need not to be alone in the universe. This crossroads is where avoidants often make the decision to reach out, not because they no longer fear intimacy, but because the cost of losing the connection outweighs the discomfort of facing their vulnerability. It's the moment they choose courage over avoidance, desire over fear, connection over self-protection. And even though they may not express it clearly, this internal shift is monumental. It marks the moment their heart speaks louder than their fear. A positive memory has more power over an avoidant than most people realize. While avoidants disconnect when they feel overwhelmed, they also reconnect when something touches the deeper, more vulnerable parts of them, parts they rarely allow anyone to see. Positive nostalgia is one of the only emotional forces strong enough to bypass their defenses because it doesn't confront them, pressure them, or demand anything from them. Instead, it gently reminds them of what felt good, what felt safe, and what felt real. This is why a simple memory can become the catalyst for an avoidant reaching out after a period of no contact. Nostalgia for an avoidant isn't simply thinking fondly of the past. It's the experience of remembering you through the lens of emotional safety. During conflict or emotional intensity, their mind protects them by amplifying risks and minimizing connection. But after distance, when their nervous system naturally resets, something interesting happens. Their brain allows positive memories to rise to the surface again. Moments that once got overshadowed by stress begin to glow with clarity. It might be the memory of a shared laugh, an inside joke, a gentle touch, a peaceful moment the two of you shared, or even a look in your eyes that made them feel understood. These memories emerge unexpectedly. An avoidant might hear a song you once listened to together, walk past a restaurant you both enjoyed, see a couple laughing the way you used to, or encounter an object that reminds them of you. And because these triggers are subtle and emotional rather than threatening, they slip past the avoidance defensive walls without activating fear. Instead of feeling pressured, they feel warmed. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they feel connected. Nostalgia softens their internal landscape. This emotional softening is incredibly important because avoidants typically protect themselves by suppressing or minimizing emotional significance. But positive nostalgia paints the connection in colors they can't deny. It brings back the sweetness of what they shared, not the stress. It reintroduces the bond without the intensity. In that softened emotional state, the avoidant can finally see the relationship without the distortions caused by fear. They remember the comfort, the stability, the joy, and the ease. They remember how your presence made them feel grounded or inspired. They remember the version of themselves they liked when they were with you. And here's the part that often surprises people. Avoidants experience longing primarily through memory. While others may feel longing through emptiness or emotional ache, avoidants feel it when something reminds them of what they had. The memory becomes the bridge between their isolated emotional world and the connection they once retreated from. A single positive memory can begin to unravel their internal narrative that they are better off alone. Because now, instead of seeing closeness as a threat, they see it as something meaningful that brought genuine pleasure into their life. Once nostalgia takes root, the avoidant begins to reevaluate the relationship with a softer heart. They might think about reaching out to share the memory, or simply feel compelled to check on you. They may look at old photos, revisit old messages, or quietly observe your life from a distance. They aren't acting yet, but the emotional tide has shifted. Their heart is waking up. It's also important to understand that avoidants trust positive memories more than they trust current emotions. The past feels safe because it's not happening in real time. Positive nostalgia allows them to reconnect with the emotional bond on their terms. The memory is predictable, it's comforting, it doesn't demand vulnerability, it only invites it. Eventually, this emotional familiarity combined with longing becomes strong enough to override their hesitation. The memory becomes the spark that tells them, it wasn't as overwhelming as I feared, it was actually something good. And when an avoidant allows themselves to feel something good again, that's often the precise moment they decide to bridge the silence and reach out. Perceived emotional safety is one of the most crucial ingredients in the psychological landscape of an avoidant, and it plays a massive role in determining when or if they decide to reach out after a period of no contact. Avoidants don't fear love, they don't fear connection. What they fear is the emotional pressure they associate with closeness. To them, emotional intensity feels like danger, like something that could trap them, overwhelm them, or demand more than they feel capable of giving. So when they pull away, it's not because they want to lose the connection, it's because they need to feel safe again before they can return to it. As the no-contact period begins, the avoidant typically feels a sense of relief. The emotional atmosphere becomes quieter. Their internal alarm system, triggered by perceived demands or expectations, slowly begins to deactivate. But as time passes, silence can take on a different meaning. What once felt like escape starts to feel like space. And space, for an avoidant, is where emotional clarity is born. It is in that clarity that they begin assessing whether reconnecting feels safe. Avoidants are constantly scanning their internal and external environment for safety cues. These cues tell them whether they can approach or whether they need to retreat again. When they sense emotional volatility, urgency, neediness, or unresolved conflict, their defenses activate. But when they sense neutrality, calmness, and emotional balance, especially from the other person, their nervous system interprets that as safety, which softens their resistance to reconnect. This perceived emotional safety often comes from noticing a shift in your energy. If you're no longer reaching out, no longer pushing for answers, no longer expressing frustration, the avoidant begins to relax. Your absence of pressure signals to them that you're not demanding their emotional availability. They interpret this as an opportunity to engage without fear of being flooded or overwhelmed. They feel like they can return at their own pace, on their own terms, which is essential for them to feel secure. But perceived emotional safety isn't only about your behavior, it's also about their internal state. During no contact, avoidants have time to regulate emotionally. Intense feelings settle, their thoughts become more organized, their inner world becomes less chaotic, As the internal noise quiets, they gain space to access their more vulnerable emotions. Longing, appreciation, curiosity, affection. These emotions cannot surface when they feel under emotional threat. They only emerge when they feel calm, centered, and in control of their inner experience. This shift creates a psychological space where reaching out no longer feels like a risk. It feels like a possibility. They begin asking themselves questions they weren't capable of considering before. What if reconnecting doesn't overwhelm me? What if things could be different? What if this person isn't expecting more from me than I can give? What if I actually missed the connection more than I feared it? These questions mark the beginning of emotional openness, and emotional openness is the doorway to reconnection. Another layer of perceived safety comes from observing your resilience and independence. When avoidants see you focusing on your life, handling your emotions without relying on them, or moving forward with confidence, it reassures them that the connection doesn't come with suffocating expectations. You're no longer signaling, "I need you," which would trigger their fear. Instead, you're silently communicating, "I'm stable, I'm grounded, and I don't require you to save me." This makes approaching you feel safe. Avoidants often return when they believe the emotional environment has changed. They come back when they feel they can be themselves without being judged, fixed, or pushed. They reach out when they trust the connection won't drag them into emotional obligations they fear they can't fulfill. Emotional safety doesn't mean the absence of intimacy, it means the absence of pressure. And once they sense that safety, both within themselves and between you, they feel free to come forward. They feel free to check in, to reconnect, to test the waters. It's this shift into emotional safety, not time, not distance, not strategy, that ultimately gives them the courage to reach out after silence. A spike in personal confidence is one of the most overlooked yet powerful triggers that influences when an avoidant decides to reach out after no contact. Avoidants often retreat when they feel emotionally off balance, insecure, or incapable of dealing with the demands of closeness. Their tendency to withdraw isn't just about avoiding others, it's about avoiding the parts of themselves they don't feel ready to face. So when their confidence dips, their instinct is to pull away to regain their footing. Only once they feel mentally and emotionally stronger do they start considering reconnecting. And this renewed sense of personal stability becomes the moment their hesitation begins to dissolve. Avoidants often carry subconscious fears of inadequacy, fears they rarely reveal. They may worry they won't be able to meet expectations, that they'll disappoint, that they'll lose themselves, or that they'll be judged for their emotional limitations. These fears are deeply rooted, often tracing back to childhood experiences where emotional vulnerability wasn't modeled or safe. As a result, when they feel overwhelmed or insecure, the safest option for them is to detach. Distance gives them time to rebuild their sense of competence and autonomy. As the no-contact period continues, the avoidant gradually moves from feeling threatened to feeling more grounded. Their emotions settle, their mind becomes clearer, and they start focusing on areas of their life that restore their sense of control: work, hobbies, goals, routines, or personal projects. As they make progress in these areas, their internal confidence slowly increases. This renewed sense of "I'm okay again" becomes the psychological soil where thoughts of reconnection can safely grow. When an avoidant feels more confident, they naturally feel more capable of reestablishing connection. They don't fear being consumed because they believe they can manage their emotions better. They don't fear disappointing someone because they feel more stable in who they are. They don't fear conflict as intensely because they believe they have the internal resources to handle it. This shift in self-perception transforms the idea of reaching out from a threat into something approachable, even appealing. This spike in personal confidence can be triggered by many things: accomplishing a goal, solving a personal problem, experiencing a professional win, improving their mental health, or simply feeling emotionally regulated after time alone. Even subtle things, cleaning their environment, completing a task, or having a good day, can restore a sense of personal strength. And avoidants often wait for this feeling before reconnecting because they want to come back from a place where they feel stable, not vulnerable. A confident avoidant sees the relationship differently. Instead of viewing closeness as something that might overwhelm them, they see it as something they can engage with intentionally. They may begin to reflect on the connection with more curiosity and openness. They start thinking about what went right rather than focusing solely on what felt difficult. They remember the moments where they felt emotionally safe, valued, or inspired. Their self-assurance allows them to revisit the bond without being consumed by fear or insecurity. Confidence also reduces shame, an emotion avoidants often feel but rarely express. When they pull away, they may feel guilty, confused, or embarrassed about how they reacted. Low confidence amplifies that shame, making it harder for them to face you again. But when their confidence rises, the shame diminishes, and reconnecting feels less daunting. They feel more ready to show up as a better version of themselves, more prepared to engage in healthy communication, and more willing to acknowledge the connection's importance. What's most revealing is that avoidants often reach out when they believe they can add value again. When they feel low, they retreat because they feel emotionally depleted. But when they feel stronger, they reemerge because they believe they can contribute positively. It's not that they didn't care before, they simply didn't trust themselves enough to come forward. Ultimately, this spike in confidence becomes the catalyst that allows them to turn intention into action. It transforms quiet thoughts of you into a willingness to reach out. It turns emotional avoidance into emotional availability. And in that moment, when they feel strong, capable, and centered, they finally believe they can reconnect without losing themselves in the process. The realization of the value you brought into their life is often the final, most transformative shift that pushes an avoidant to reach out after a period of no contact. This realization doesn't arrive suddenly or dramatically. It creeps in slowly, often quietly, as the avoidant begins to see the contrast between what life felt like with you and what life feels like without you. When an avoidant initially pulls away, they usually convince themselves that distance is the solution, that their independence will feel lighter, that solitude will offer clarity, and that space will restore their emotional balance. But as time passes and the emotional waves settle, something unexpected begins to happen. The connection they once minimized begins to reveal its true significance. Avoidants often appreciate things in hindsight, not in the moment. While closeness may feel overwhelming for them when they're inside it, the absence of that closeness creates a void they didn't anticipate. The things they once took for granted begin to stand out. Your stability, your warmth, your encouragement, your presence. The emotional nourishment they received from the relationship is something they typically didn't consciously register, because their defenses blur emotional reality in real time. But in silence, without emotional pressure or relational tension clouding their perception, they begin to see the truth. You added something meaningful to their life that they don't easily find elsewhere. This realization often emerges in small, subtle ways. Perhaps they notice that conversations with others don't feel as deep or as natural. Maybe they realize that no one understands them the way you did, or no one makes them feel as calm or grounded. They remember the way you supported them without trying to control them, the way you gave them space while still being emotionally available, or the way you made them feel seen even when they struggled to express themselves. These memories are not grand gestures. They're consistent, quiet moments of emotional resonance that become impossible for them to ignore once the noise in their mind settles. Avoidants often thrive in structured independence, but even they cannot deny the emotional contrast that emerges in your absence. They may find that their daily life feels more mechanical, less vibrant, or less inspired. They may notice that the solitude they once found comforting now feels heavier, more isolating. Emotional value is often invisible until it's removed. And once it's removed, they begin to feel the subtle emptiness that takes its place. It's not that they suddenly crave dependency. They start to crave the specific quality of connection they experienced with you. One of the most powerful shifts happens when they realize that the connection wasn't threatening. It was supportive. That while intimacy felt overwhelming at times, the relationship itself wasn't harmful, their fear was. This distinction becomes clearer with distance, and as it settles in, they begin to appreciate what the relationship represented: balance, emotional safety, companionship, partnership, or personal growth. They realize you brought peace into their life in ways they didn't understand before. They may even compare the emotional experience of being with you to past relationships or current interactions. When they do, they start to recognize how uniquely fulfilling your connection was. This comparison isn't about idealizing you. It's about acknowledging the scarcity of emotional resonance in their world. Avoidants don't easily let people close, but when someone does get close, their impact is profound, even if it takes time for the avoidant to admit it. As this realization deepens, it triggers something essential: appreciation, and appreciation for an avoidant is often the gateway to action. When they understand that your presence brought value, authenticity, and emotional substance into their life, the fear that kept them distant begins to weaken. They start to feel the risk of losing something meaningful. They start to sense the finality that silence could bring, and that awareness nudges them toward reconnection. This is often the psychological tipping point. They don't reach out because they suddenly become fearless. They reach out because the value of the connection becomes greater than the fear of vulnerability. They reach out because they recognize that what you offered wasn't pressure. It was partnership. They reach out because losing the connection feels like losing something genuine, something rare, something they cannot easily replace. And in that quiet, honest moment of realization, they finally decide to bridge the distance and reach out. When everything is said and done, remember this. Connection isn't about chasing, forcing, or proving your worth. It's about standing in the truth of who you are and letting that truth shape the world around you. The moment an avoidant reaches out is not a mystery. It's the result of a deep internal shift within them, triggered by your strength, your growth, and your decision to honor yourself. Silence didn't just change them. It refined you. It taught you patience, clarity, and power. And now, whether they return or not, you stand as someone wiser, stronger, and more aligned with your own worth. Take this understanding with you, not as a strategy to win someone back, but as a compass for your future. Every relationship, every heartbreak, every reunion, every silence is part of your transformation. You are being shaped into someone who doesn't wait for love to save them. Someone who creates love from within and attracts everything aligned with their highest good. So step forward with confidence. Choose peace over fear. Choose growth over attachment. Choose yourself in every moment. And trust that the right people will meet you at the level of the strength you've cultivated. Thank you for being here, for listening, for opening your heart to this message. Your presence matters. Your journey matters. And your future, guided by self-awareness and emotional truth, is brighter than you can imagine. Take this wisdom with you, carry it boldly, and remember you deserve a love that does not run from your depth but rises to meet it. Thank you, take care, and until we speak again, goodbye and keep rising.